Eye for an eye. The phrase sounds brutal, primitive, vengeful. We use it today to criticize cycles of violence, to mock ancient barbarism. But here's what most people miss. This phrase represents one of the most radical statements of human equality ever written. Eye for an eye was a limitation on punishment. It declared that a poor man's eye was worth exactly as much as a king's. To understand why this was revolutionary, we need to see what came before. The ancient Near East had sophisticated legal codes centuries before biblical law emerged. The Code of Hammurabi, Hittite laws, Middle Assyrian laws. These weren't primitive societies. They built empires, developed writing, created complex bureaucracies, but their legal systems shared one fundamental assumption: people were not equal. Your social class determined your legal rights and the punishment for crimes against you. Look at how Hammurabi's code handled a simple eye injury. If an aristocrat destroyed the eye of another aristocrat, the punishment was talion, eye for eye. Fair enough. But if that same aristocrat destroyed the eye of a commoner, just pay 60 shekels of silver. And if he destroyed a slave's eye, pay half the slave's market value to the owner. The implication is explicit. A commoner's eye literally wasn't worth as much as a noble's eye. A slave's eye was worth even less. This wasn't a bug in the system. This was the system. Your body had different value depending on your birth. Now consider what biblical law did differently. Leviticus chapter 24 states, "You shall have one standard for stranger and citizen alike, one standard, not 3 tiers based on social class." The technical term is lex talionis, the law of talion. Talion means the punishment mirrors the crime. Eye for eye, tooth for tooth. This wasn't about vengeance. It established 2 principles simultaneously: proportionality and equality. The punishment fits the crime, no more, no less, and your status is irrelevant. The wealthy couldn't buy their way out by paying a fine. The powerful couldn't demand excessive punishment to make an example. Everyone faced the same consequences for the same actions. In a world where kings were gods and slaves were property, this was genuinely radical. Right? The law didn't care if you were the son of a merchant or the son of a shepherd. Before the court, your eye was worth exactly what everyone else's eye was worth. And this principle echoes through every modern legal system that claims equality before the law, but the implications go deeper than equal punishment. Biblical law made a fundamental distinction that other ancient codes didn't: the difference between crimes against life and crimes against property. In Hammurabi's code, you could be executed for theft, executed for cheating a customer on drink prices, executed for helping a slave escape. Property crimes carried the death penalty. In biblical law, never. Death was reserved for intentional homicide and certain offenses against God. Numbers chapter 35 makes this explicit. You cannot accept a ransom payment to let a murderer go free. Life and property are incommensurable. Human life has a value that money cannot replace. This brings us to a difficult topic: slavery. Biblical law did not abolish slavery. We need to acknowledge that honestly. But within that institution, biblical law introduced protections that were unprecedented in the ancient world. Exodus chapter 21. If a master knocks out a slave's tooth, the slave goes free. Physical abuse meant emancipation. Sabbath rest extended to slaves. They got the same day off as everyone else. These weren't full human rights by modern standards, but they were genuine innovations in a world that treated slaves as pure property. The contrast becomes stark with fugitive slave laws. Hammurabi's Code, laws 15 through 19. If you harbor a fugitive slave, you die. If you help a slave escape, you die. The death penalty for showing compassion to a runaway. Deuteronomy chapter 23 takes the opposite position. You shall not turn over to his master a slave who seeks refuge with you. He shall live with you in any place he chooses. You must not ill-treat him. Protect the fugitive, give them shelter, don't return them. The humanitarian impulse is unmistakable. One more revolutionary principle, the rejection of collective punishment. Hammurabi's code includes this scenario. If your ox kills someone's child, your own child is killed. The logic is literal substitution. You lost a child, so I lose a child. Deuteronomy chapter 24 rejects this completely. A person shall be put to death only for his own crime. Individual moral responsibility. You cannot punish the innocent for the guilty. Children don't inherit their parents' legal liability. This seems obvious now. It wasn't obvious then. It was a moral breakthrough. These principles didn't stay in ancient texts. They shaped the legal traditions that followed. Proportional punishment, equality before the law, the distinction between crimes against persons and crimes against property, individual rather than collective responsibility. When we say someone deserves a punishment that fits the crime, we're invoking talion. When we insist the wealthy face the same consequences as the poor, we're echoing Leviticus. The phrase eye for an eye became shorthand for vengeance, but its original meaning was justice tempered by equality. Here's another phrase often misunderstood: the poor will always be with you. People quote this to justify inaction on poverty. Why bother helping if poverty is inevitable? But read the full context in Deuteronomy chapter 15. It says, because the poor will never cease from the land, therefore I command you to open your hand wide to your brother. The persistence of poverty isn't an excuse, it's the reason for ongoing obligation. Because need never ends, neither does our responsibility to help, the opposite of how it's usually quoted. Sometimes the most revolutionary ideas hide in the most familiar phrases. Eye for an eye wasn't primitive vengeance, it was the radical claim that every human being has equal worth before the law, that a slave's tooth matters, that a poor man's eye counts, that life cannot be exchanged for silver. These ancient words still challenge us to ask, do we truly believe in equality before the law?